Hello there. On this another lockdown Sunday, another Sunday in which church has been conducted online, and here you'll find the Sunday message that was given in the church service on Zoom this morning. And in that service, we heard from the following bits of scripture. We heard Psalm 23, we heard John chapter 10, verses 1 to 10, and finally Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47. So it might be that you want to go and read those passages now before continuing in this video. But what you'll find is quite a lot of imagery about shepherding and sheep, and in Acts a text about how the early church community conducted itself. In the Gospel of John, in chapter 10, Jesus speaks following the healing of a blind man in chapter 9. And as we go further into chapter 10, Jesus will claim to be the Good Shepherd. In Psalm 23, we find another passage that features shepherding imagery. And this time the psalmist describes God as his shepherd, the shepherd who comforts in dark times with his rod and his staff. Now, in these bleak and challenging times, this image of Jesus as the shepherd and the comforting presence of God in the valley of the shadow of death is a helpful image for us. It can open our eyes to God walking with us on this dark journey as we face all kinds of different struggles, some caused by COVID-19 and other problems that have been exacerbated by the effects it has had on our lives. Now, if we think of the common images of the Good Shepherd, kind of paintings and things that depict Jesus as a shepherd, they tend to feature him holding a lamb. And it's a very beautiful and very cute image with a clean-cut shepherd that seems to ignore the realities of the job and the dirt and struggle on the hillsides. But it's always depicted in a way that calms us, that brings reassurance. It says that where you're with Jesus, there's safety, comfort, and guidance. It shows that the Good Shepherd loves his sheep. Now, to fully appreciate the shepherd imagery used by John, we need to understand how the Middle Eastern shepherd works. In the Middle East, the shepherd goes ahead of his sheep, calling them to follow. The sheep have to trust the shepherd and be willing to follow him. There's a strong bond between a good shepherd and his sheep, a reality which is very different from the way the shepherd works in the UK. Here, the shepherd lets the sheep roam the hillsides, assured of plentiful supplies of grass or other vegetation, and that there's not many predators about. And our shepherds have trusty dogs to help with the rounding up of the flock. The shepherd in this case has little chance of knowing each of his sheep by name. It's quite a contrast in style, British shepherding compared to that in the Middle East. Now, there's much in all of the biblical image of the Good Shepherd that is true and comforting for us. Yet if we read on to the end of John chapter 10, we might be surprised to find that Jesus' words bring neither comfort nor consolation. His audience does not feel assured or protected, rather they are divided and come to the conclusion that Jesus could only heal the blind man as he is possessed by a demon. Some started to throw stones at Jesus and called for his death. How can it be that an image in most of Christian history that's been used to make us feel better in the gospel actually makes people angry? How can words that have traditionally brought comfort to the hurting, the lonely, the scared, the grieving, be the source of conflict and hostility? You see, Jesus' claim to be the Good Shepherd puts him in direct conflict with the Pharisees and other Jewish leaders, and also in direct conflict with Rome. Caesar claimed to be a god, one who shepherded his people well. Just as when Jesus takes on other titles, such as Son of God, he treads on the toes of empire. Jesus claims to be the true Good Shepherd, one that will bring protection and abundant living to all people. Not only that, he implies that those who see themselves as the shepherds of the people have failed in their duty. They don't care for their sheep, and the sheep don't trust them. All of this imagery draws on the consistent use of shepherding imagery in the Hebrew scriptures. Time and time again, in the Old Testament, God is pictured as the shepherd of his people. Perhaps most obviously Psalm 23 that we've looked at and mentioned already. The Lord is my shepherd, it begins. But also Psalm 79, we your people, the sheep of your pasture, will praise you forever. Psalm 95 says, he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. And in Isaiah 40, we have a picture of God as a gentle and loving shepherd. It says, he will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those who are with young. Quite an image of God as the shepherd. But then as the nation of Israel seeks to appoint itself a king, we find that God describes the king as being a shepherd. In Ezekiel chapter 34, it says, I will set over them one shepherd, my servant David. He shall feed them and be their shepherd. Now David, as a boy, of course, started out as a shepherd. He uses his trusty sling to slay Goliath, something he'd usually be using to protect the sheep from predators. So the image of the shepherd is a powerful one, steeped in the tradition, religion, and expectation of the Jewish nation. And the dream of God is that his shepherds will be faithful and true. What we find in the Old Testament is great condemnation for those shepherds who fail in their task. And we can hear of that in Jeremiah chapter 23, where it says, woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Ezekiel 2 has a grim picture of shepherds who lead the sheep astray, who don't care for their flock. It says in Ezekiel chapter 34 that the weak you haven't strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the crippled you have not bound up, the strays you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought. So in Hebrew scripture, we find both good and bad shepherds, and the Pharisees certainly saw themselves as the good shepherds of the people, keeping them safe inside the law of God. So they were outraged when Jesus claimed that he himself was the only way to gain access to God's favor, that he was the gate by which the sheep must enter the fold. Jesus stood in complete contrast to the Old Testament imagery of the bad shepherd, for he's the shepherd who goes out into the wild places to find the lost sheep. He's the shepherd who is moved with compassion for his flock. Jesus is the good shepherd. There's no wonder that some who were listening were upset by what he said. Jesus, as the gate to the sheepfold, was also opening it up wider than ever before. He was spending time with those who had been pushed out of society. The blind man who he healed was cut off due to suspected sin of his parents. The Samaritan woman at the well, those with leprosy that he touched and cured. He ate with sinners and tax collectors. Now, as shepherds claiming to look out for the flock, the priests and Pharisees would have nothing to do with these people. Yet Jesus, the gatekeeper, welcomes them into the fold. With Jesus at the gate of the sheepfold, we have a great image of welcome, a door that is open to all those who respond to him, leading to a place of protection. And at this time, in our current circumstances, this place of protection is an important one. We're all thankful for our doors, especially in this time of lockdown. There is a time for taking shelter and heading to a safe place, for bolting the door shut, physically and spiritually. Yet Jesus, as the gatekeeper, offers much more than simply a place to hide, because his purpose is to welcome more people in. A door is for passing through, for enabling welcome and hospitality. This is the ultimate purpose of the incarnation, of Jesus coming to live amongst us, to open the gateway to God's presence, to lay down his life for his flock, to reveal the way to abundant life for his people. The sheep cannot just stay in the protection of the sheepfold, though. They have to leave through the gate to go and find food, to be led to abundant feeding grounds by their shepherd. Today, we might wonder what abundant living looks like for us. In recent years, if we look to those who have become our national shepherds, to those in government and both nationally and internationally, abundant living seems to have been mixed up with GDP, gross domestic product. How well the economy is doing, how much money the nation is turning over, how the stock market is doing. Yet we know that this isn't resulting in abundant living at all for the vast majority of people. Even for the privileged, it doesn't necessarily lead to deep down happiness, as there's always more money to earn, the next product to buy, the next thing to collect. Abundant living, then, is something different to material wealth. We see some kind of image of abundant life in the verses that we read concerning the early church in Acts chapter 2. All members of the Christian community, the flock, share what they have. No one is left behind. They care for each other's physical and spiritual needs. They all live abundantly together, loving God and loving their neighbours. Now, coronavirus has highlighted anew the disparity in living conditions for rich and poor, whether it be access to clean water and soap for washing, access to different levels of medical provision, or even the chance of avoiding the need to work, as so many in the world have faced the stark choice between staying safe at home and starving, or working on and risking infection. In our own country, we've seen that those living in the poorest boroughs of our nation are twice as likely to die from COVID-19 as those in the richest areas. We've seen that those from black and other minority ethnic backgrounds are twice as likely to die than those who are white. And there's many reasons for this, and it's a result, though, of ongoing injustice, of long-term inequity, a vestige of racism through the centuries, aligned with a widening gap between rich and poor. Our national and international leaders have not provided abundant living for all people, just for a minority. They have neglected the majority of their sheep. As we come to learn more of the potential origins of coronavirus and reasons why it's been able to spread so quickly, I think it's also been clear that abundant living means living in harmony with creation, as opposed to expanding indefinitely. Abundant living is life in a less consumptive manner, in a way that allows for the flourishing of both humankind and all living creatures. Abundant life for me in the last few weeks has involved hearing the birdsong, noticing the flowers, as well as pining for the hills that I can't access and wouldn't be able to visit anyway, as they're so far away now. Our well-being, physically, mentally, and spiritually, is intrinsically tied up with the well-being of our planet. This is a key part of abundant living. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, lays down his life for all of creation. He is resurrected from the dead in order to restore all of creation, to bring new life in all of its fullness to those who follow him and the entire created order. And that means abundant living for all, for the entirety of humankind and the entirety of the natural world. And any shepherd that calls us elsewhere, that preys on our greed, our selfishness, or our fears, is no more than a thief who has scaled the wall of the sheepfold, a distraction from our calling to abundant life. May we know the comforting presence of the Good Shepherd in these times, for we surely need it. But don't forget the challenge that this shepherd brings, the call to turn this world upside down by welcoming those into the sheepfold that others would keep out, and by seeking abundant life for all of creation, not only ourselves. Amen.